and an interfaith foundation associated with the University of Southern California. And I'm pleased to open this panel discussion on the question of loneliness. You know, we live in the greatest time to be alive. No nation in history has ever been so blessed with abundance. The abundance of food and shelter, access to health care, availability of transportation, and the growth and blanketing of technology that makes ordinary daily living tasks easier. So why is the rising generation so increasingly feeling a sense of aloneness and a loneliness, a trend that preceded the pandemic by several years? Some say it's the disintegration of the nuclear family, robbing children of the feelings of stability and security in their early lives that follow them into adulthood. Well, we're going to explore these issues today with our panel of leading thinkers and practitioners who deal with these issues both as theoretical concepts and as the daily reality of those that they serve. Welcome all. Let me open this conversation by asking Audrey Kitagawa to present her thoughts. Audrey Kitagawa is the president founder of the International Academy of Multicultural Cooperation, president of the Light of Awareness International Spiritual Family, and the former advisor to the Office of the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Children and Armed Conflict at the United Nations. She's the chair of the Anti-Racism Initiative and co-chair of the Gender Equality Working Group of the G20 Interfaith Forum. She's an ambassador of Religions for Peace International and United Nations representative for the United Religions Initiative. So I would introduce Audrey, and please feel free to begin.
Thank you so much, Larry, for that introduction and for this privilege to speak about the crisis of loneliness among young Americans and to explore this important issue with you, Varun, Soni, and Gail Stearns. You know, Larry, in your opening comments, I think you have actually set forth a very succinct juxtaposition that economic prosperity and having more material things does not lead to true well-being and inner peace or security. And it doesn't allow us to embrace and discover the deeper meaning of life, which is really comprised of our values, ethics, and true purpose for being here, which arises out of our connection to that sacred ground of being in which all of life exists. And this drive for material abundance has defined our success by how many possessions we can acquire and own. And material success does not provide the answer to the fundamental, deeper, perennial question of who am I? And this is the deep inquiry that must take place in order to discover our true worth of who we really are that is far greater than any material possession. Now, during the Great Depression, the goal of achieving the American dream was really framed by historian James Truslow Adams, who coined the phrase American dream. And in his book, The Epic of America, Adams described this dream. He said, "It is a land in which life should be better and richer and fuller for everyone, with opportunity for each according to ability or achievement. It is not a dream of motor cars and high wages and merely, but a dream of social order in which each man and each woman shall be able to attain to the fullest stature of which they are innately capable and be recognized by others for what they are, regardless of the fortuitous circumstances of birth or position." Then historian David Farber says the term quickly came to include the desire for affluence. And he said that it became closely linked to material comfort, to the consumer abundance America was producing, and a better life started to connote not just an economically secure life, but an abundant life. So there's a kind of linkage between upward mobility, a better life, and the good stuff that would make it so. You know, we've all heard the saying, a chicken in every pot, which is actually a prosperity campaign slogan promoted by Herbert Hoover when he ran for president during the Great Depression. However, a dream that frames well-being into a materialistic construction does not, in fact, bring well-being, but can rather lead us away from ourselves. And the crisis of loneliness, then, I would say, is a crisis of self-alienation. On some fundamental level, we inherently do know that the externalities of materiality that is ever changing creates greater fear and instability because we are defining our sense of well-being and happiness on things that are fleeting and impermanent. We all know that we came into this world naked, and that when we leave this world, there isn't a single material thing that we can take with us. So our drive to accumulate more things has thrown us into a competitive paradigm that creates an identity of success based on ownership of the newest, biggest, greatest gadget, car, house, designer, purse, shoes, and whatever it may be that perpetuates classism and elitism that creates an illusion of being powerful. And you are then fed into a power dynamics of distinctions of hierarchies that necessarily mean you are either in the one up over another position or a one down under another position. So this has led to greater feelings of powerlessness and insecurity as those things that used to reinforce our sense of security and well-being, such as, for example, intergenerational family support systems, have really given way to nuclear families, increasing divorce rates with struggling single parents as well. And even in the two-parent families, when both parents are working and the children are interacting with digital devices from a very young age, there is less interaction between family members, fewer meals taken together, fewer substantive conversation, and a really tragic loss of connections within the family structure, which are fundamental to a child's development of a solid set of core values and the essential skills needed to communicate and interact and engage with society in a healthy and productive manner. So young people do need parental and spiritual guidance, mentorship, healthy friendships, and wholesome activities. And as they navigate the challenges of finding their place in society, it is these sound core values and principles for living that will guide and inform their decisions and give them important insights and awareness about life and the deeper meaning of life. So instilling solid core values in children should not be left to chance, but should be a conscious, diligent focus of parents in early education. And the danger of households where family time and interaction are limited by busy parents and digitally obsessed children is a resulting lack of communication about values, which could result in being highly influenced by peers and social media influencers or the designers of the digital content that so absorbs our youth today. And the churches which once provided guidance and context for crafting and supporting personal values and ethics are no longer the influence they once were. And according to Gallup, church membership in the US is down more than 20 points from the turn of the century. And in 2020, 47% of Americans said they belong to a church, synagogue, or mosque, down from 50% in 2018 and 70% in 1999. So if families are challenged by the pace and demands of life and churches no longer provide the level of support they may have in the past, the responsibility ultimately for one's behavior, ethics, attitudes, opinions, and beliefs will fall more and more on each individual. And developing self-understanding by engaging in purposeful introspection is a personal responsibility which each person must undertake. And it is a very weighty responsibility, but an inescapable one. So there is always great optimism and hope when speaking of young people. And I am uplifted to hear about their activism and advocacy, their concern for the environment, and their calls for racial and gender equality. And I firmly believe that they will be the change makers, but loneliness and isolation can be overcome. And those who have known it can become the beacons of real love, friendship, and inclusion, which are born out of an understanding and compassion because of their own difficulties, which they have endured. And developing the heart of compassion caring, and loving thoughts, speech, and action in all that we do will be the key to the healing that must take place, not just in our young people, but in our entire society. And our youth will be the agents for change. Thank you.
Well, I think, Audrey, you have framed the issue wonderfully well. Thank you for leading out and beginning our thought process on that. I'd now like to introduce Dr. Varun Sani. Varun and I have been friends for a long time now, so pretty easy to introduce somebody that you think you know so well. And I'm so happy that Dr. Sani, who's the Dean of Religious Life and Spiritual Life at the University of Southern California, could be with us. He serves as the Vice Provost of Campus Wellness and Crisis Intervention, and he teaches courses in the School of Religion and the Chan Division of Occupational Science and Occupational Therapy. In his different roles, he oversees campus well-being, threat assessment, support and advocacy, ombud services, and spiritual life for the university. Before arriving at the University of Southern California, he spent 4 years teaching in the Law and Society program at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Varun?
Thank you so much, Larry. I really appreciate those kind words, just like we rehearsed. Thank you for that. Audrey, so good to see you. Gail, always a joy to be with you. Thank you for being here. You know, I'm going to address this from my role as Dean of Religious and Spiritual Life, and I see similar things as Gail sees. We have similar roles as the Chief Religious and Spiritual Leader of our respective universities. We've overlapped in this work, and I think we can bring complementary perspectives on a similar demographic, which is basically our student population. So when I started as the university's chaplain in 2008, the great joy of my job was pastoral care and spiritual counseling. I got to have confidential conversations with students that allowed me to participate in the sort of triumph and tragedy of a student's educational journey. And those were conversations that reminded me of the conversations I had with my university chaplain. They were inspiring conversations. Those were the conversations of meaning and purpose, of hope and authenticity. Students used to come to me and ask me questions like, who am I? And what is the nature of God? And how do I translate my values into action? And how do I live an authentic life? And what matters to me? And why does it matter to me? And how do I think about what matters to me? And who am I? Who is the I that's even thinking about what matters to me? These are very deep, profound conversations that sort of animated my career, animated my life. And I felt like I had done everything right in my life to be in a position where I could have these conversations with students. But about 4 or 5 years ago, everything changed for me. And I noticed that instead of asking me, how should I live? Students were more likely to ask me, why should I live? Instead of asking me about meaning, they started to ask me about meaninglessness. And I began to think, okay, I've been on campus for a number of years. The students who are really in crisis are finally getting to me. But that wasn't what was happening at all. What I was seeing was a generational shift before my very eyes between millennials who were leaving college at the time and post-millennials who were coming, Generation Y and Generation Z. And what I saw in that generational shift was a mental, emotional, and spiritual health crisis. And I think this mental, emotional, and spiritual health crisis is the biggest challenge in American higher education today, period. 80% of college presidents will tell you their biggest challenge is the mental health of their students. And now we have a situation where 65% of undergraduate students around the country, 65%, tell us that they're so anxious that they're having trouble functioning. That's not an outlier number. That is mainstream now. Anxiety has become baseline. 1/3 of students are wrestling with depression. 10% of students have thought about suicide over the last year. On a campus of 50,000 students, these are big numbers that I encounter every year. And it gets worse and worse every year. We know the rates of self-harm and depression have doubled in the last 9 years amongst college-age students. And so what's going on here? Why are students today more anxious than they were during the Great Depression and more depressed than they were during World War II? Like, what's different about this population? Well, as I began to sort of dig deeper on the issue and talk to colleagues around the country, what I realized that at the heart of this, when you sort of start to poke, is a deep and abiding sense of loneliness. I believe that our young people today are going through a spiritual crisis of loneliness, a crisis of disconnection. And it made me wonder, how can this generation be so disconnected when we're told they're the most connected generation ever? And so I've been wrestling with this. This is what keeps me up at night. And sort of what I've realized is that what I see is what everyone sees. Cigna did a survey, and they're a they're a healthcare company, and their survey found that the loneliest people in the United States right now are not the eldest, but the youngest, and particularly 18 to 22-year-olds. According to Cigna, the loneliest people in the United States are 18 to 22-year-olds. Those are undergraduates. And that's why over the last, 5 or 6 years, I get a question every week, almost every day, that I never got for the first 5 or 6 years of my career. And that question is, how do I make friends? On a campus of 50,000 students their age, students are asking me, the old man in the corner, how to make friends. So what's going on here? What's different with this generation? I think there's two primary differences with this generation that make them different than any generation in American history, and really any generation in human history. And both of these factors, or the convergence of these two factors, I think have created this spiritual crisis of loneliness. The first is the rise of social media. I mean, these are the first digital natives in human history. For 100,000 years, we've been talking with our tongues, and now we're telling students to talk with their thumbs. The way that social media has reframed basic human community and communication is dramatic, and we don't understand the consequences. This is a test case generation. We call it social media, but every data point tells us that our social media is antisocial. These devices, long before COVID took our students away from each other, their phones had already taken them away from each other. And these devices have kept them away from each other. They don't date as much, they don't drive as much, they don't go out as much. They don't have offline communities of support. They have these online communities. They may think that they have 10,000 friends online, but they wrestle with what it means to be a friend offline in real life. And this goes to Audrey's perspective, this notion that everything that may ail us can be solved by consuming or buying something, or if I have the right thing or the right job or the right look, then suddenly I'll have the right life. All of these messages that Audrey is talking about that make us feel empty even as they're supposed to be filling us up, all of those messages are communicated, reinforced on social media. And so our students have seen everyone's real life and have compared the worst aspects of their life. They've seen everyone's curated Instagram lives and have compared the worst aspects of their lives to the idealized lives of others. We never had that. And because of that, they feel like they don't belong. They feel like they're imposters, and they feel as though they're doing something wrong. They feel disconnected. The second thing, which we'll talk about in this, is the loss of religion. In 1950, 2% of Americans were not affiliated with religion. Today, more than 20% of Americans are not affiliated with religion. But for my students, it's almost 50% of Americans who are not affiliated with religion. And there are studies that show us that if you have an intergenerational spiritual experience growing up, you're 80% less likely to suffer from depression as a young adult. So in an age of unprecedented non-affiliation with religion, we're seeing unprecedented anxiety and depression. Now, correlation doesn't always equal causality, but I think we can draw a straight line from students who don't have meaning-making skills either through the liberal arts or through organized religion, trying to find meaning in the world through social media and feeling as though they're less than, that they don't belong, that they're imposters. Because quite frankly, that's what social media is designed to do. And so they are behaving the way that social media has sort of programmed them to behave. And so this to me is the big thing that very few people are talking about that makes this generation different than every other generation.
Thank you, Varun. I'm pleased that Gail Stearns can be with us today. Gail is the Irvin C. and Ely Chapman Dean of the Wallace All Faith Chapel and Associate Professor of Religious Studies at Chapman University. She's an ordained minister of the Presbyterian Church USA and holds an interdisciplinary PhD from Washington State University focused on theories and theologies of gender. She fosters interfaith celebrations and gatherings, as well as academic conversations in the areas of faith and religion. She has a certification in mindfulness teaching from UCLA. She teaches contemplative practice and fosters interfaith dialogue and academic conversations. Dr. Stearns is the author of 4 books, including Liberating Mindfulness, forthcoming book on Orbis Press. Gail, so glad you can join us today, and please, we're looking forward to what you have to teach us.
Thank you, Larry. It's really an honor and a privilege to be here with you and Audrey and my good friend Varun. So thank you for beginning the conversation, and I'm going to push it just a little bit further. I think the 2 introductions, your remarks have been just perfect. As Dean of the Interfaith Center, I oversee, like Varun does, a staff of chaplains to serve the spiritual life of our campus. So I'm going to speak from that perspective as well. Chaplains across the country have identified the most important issues facing college students, and one of those we've spoken about, and that's loneliness. But let me talk about these in kind of three broader terms. Identified the issue of mental health, as Varun has mentioned. A second one is social justice in the world that we live in. And the third one is this lack of sense of belonging or community, the loneliness. As chaplains, we spend a lot of time listening, and we observe that these issues are deeply interrelated. What we're hearing is that part of the reason for the enormous loneliness and anxiety among young people relates to the world we live in. An increasingly complicated globe, fraught with concerns of environment and climate, leaving young people to wonder if they'll even have a future. Economies that force many to the fringes, so that particularly students in minority communities live with fear daily. Black and brown people, LGBTQ persons, Sikhs wearing turbans, Muslims in hijab, are all unable to go about their business without constant fear of members of their families being targeted. As Larry mentioned, our nation is blessed with greater abundance than ever, but I think our students are asking abundance for whom? The pandemic unearthed and laid bare these discrepancies of access to health care and so much more. Further, as Varun says, young people today speak with their thumbs rather than their tongues, a fact that increased throughout this year of isolation. If one could feel isolated and bullied before, today it occurs even more frequently online. My colleague, Dr. Jay Kumar, is the Director of Wellbeing at Chapman University, and Jay identifies a need for support as the students are returning post-pandemic this fall. These are the needs they will have: belonging and inclusion, the sense of loneliness, trauma, grief, and loss due to societal injustice, meaning and purpose, and ethical, moral, and spiritual identity. I want to turn for a moment to a few ways we're tackling this. We haven't talked yet about that. At the university, we're tackling it in so many ways, from mental health counselors and educational programs to academic courses, helping students think critically. But I want to highlight one way alongside these many ways that we are actually addressing the epidemic of loneliness. At the Fish Interfaith Center, we're launching something that I know is very similar to, I'm sure, what Varun is planning this fall. We're calling it spiritual resilience. We're introducing varieties of contemplative practices. So if a student is religious, this may mean learning a discipline of a Bible study, or having space to pray 5 times a day, or instruction to sit in morning meditation, or joining a gospel choir. If they're not, we introduce new techniques that are really not that new, as they're steeped in ancient practices, meditation and yoga, for example. I wanted to mention, I am a teacher of mindfulness, and I wanted to interject that what I find fascinating is that brain science is, for the first time in my awareness, substantiating what religious practitioners have known all along, that spiritual practices like meditation and prayer deepen compassion. So there is a connection between students not getting this as they're growing up and feeling lonely. I want to add, however, that not all mindfulness as it appears today is created equal. It is a set of tools that can be used to increase anxiety, and as a teacher, I see this. It can, for example, be used so workers become more productive in business without questioning the ethics of that business. On the other hand, it can be intentionally utilized toward developing compassion for the most vulnerable. What we're finding is that when these practices are employed ethically and practiced within community, we help some young people tap into their inner resources. They gain a sense of belonging, set times to be present, which means turning off their cell phones and devices at set times. They gain deeper awareness and develop inner spiritual resources, awareness of their relationship with that which is greater than themselves, awareness of their interconnectedness with the earth and its people, and inspiration to make a difference. This spring, I taught over Zoom an academic course in mindfulness. And when I teach that, of course, I interweave the practice with being mindful in daily life of ourselves and people and the environment. And I introduce ways in which it stems from spiritual traditions. I want to close my remarks by giving you the voice of several of my students. This is, as we work in the class, we introduce this in ways that it offers spiritual religious practice for those to whom that has meaning. And that is true for probably, as Varun said, 50% of our students. So let me close with words from two senior students, both deeply committed to their own religion. One is a Christian and one is Jewish. And they are both wanting to understand how to deepen their spirituality as each moves toward a career following graduation. And once again, I think as we've been talking about, spirituality really means connectedness to ourselves, to one another in community, to the world around us, and to the divine in whatever way it is that we define that. Taylor wrote this: "When starting my mindfulness and meditation journey, I believe the practices to be super personal, with no room for others to join in my process. Still, through this class, I have learned to talk and bounce my knowledge off the experiences of my classmates. Community is a huge aspect of life that makes us social beings stronger and less lonely." And Dahlia wrote this: "Before this semester, I knew nothing of what my soul longed for: stillness, peace, serenity. This class has taught me more about myself than any other subject the last 16 years I've been a student, and every day I am grateful for each lesson it has shared with me. I have learned how to control my anxiety with my own breath. Whenever I feel anxious, stressed, or uncomfortable, I use my breath to connect. I can't be dishonest with myself, you, or anyone. This year has been far from easy. It has been everything other than what one could expect from their last year of university. There has been loss, filled with immense pain, fear, and dark nights. To say that I'm ready for what's to come is to understate how clear I am about my path. But that's the beauty in the stillness I have learned. I know with full confidence I can face the future. I believe that I have discovered tools and practices that will both ground me to the earth and continue to ascend me to the dimensions above." Thank you.
So many places that we can take this. I think I'd like to start with asking Audrey a question, although please, I'd like everyone to speak into this. Audrey, you spoke about the core values of being a foundation to guide and support young people. Well, indeed, all people, as far as that goes, through their lives. How can parents, schools, and other institutions, and our religious institutions, instill these values in our youth? It seems like it's becoming more and more difficult to find public institutions that are willing to step out and speak of core values for fear that those core values are going to be mocked in some way or another. Audrey, how would you respond to that?
Thank you so much for that question. And I think core values are essential because they help to frame what is our purpose in life. And core values not only provide the context in which you can ascertain whether or not you are living in alignment with your core values, but whether or not you can implement your core values in the moment, from moment to moment in everyday life. And I think it is important for the parents, and historically it has been the parents who have instilled values in the children, and to make it a priority to be able to articulate what are, core immutable values that one should have. It's in sacred text, they usually have these prescriptive behaviors like thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness against anyone. And basically the affirmative is that, one should be truthful. And, in satyagraha, truthfulness is a very important aspect of developing yourself as a purposeful person, a person who is moving through life with meaning, but is moving through life in a way that is honoring and respecting the sacredness of life and the integrity of your relationships with others, so that you will be truthful in your relationships, that you will not, steal from others, that you in fact would develop ways of being in the world that are honorable, that speak to your personal integrity. And of course, this assumes that you will take responsibility for how you are conducting your life or minding your life and thinking your life and speaking your life and acting your life. So in all ways, this alignment must come about. And I think it's critical for families to be able to have open discussions about what are values. And, people get married never having a discussion about values. A lot of chemistry is taking place. But then when they have to live in the day-to-dayness of being together, they often find that they're not compatible. But so it's important that all the way along the board, we be able to address this aspect of what are our values. And this begins with a process of self-inquiry, that you should know what values are important to you. And so it's a very important conversation to have with yourself, within the families, within the churches. And I think that would be the biggest expression of being able to change the public discourse, and to know that, when we embrace the value of honoring and respecting the sacredness of life and the dignity of each person, you get to see it that, using degrading, hurtful language, especially in our public civic spaces, is not acceptable. And then you hold yourself accountable to refrain from behaving in such a way. And of course, our leadership is very important to be able to model that as well. So who we select as our leaders is exceedingly important.
I'd like to follow that up. Varun, you talk about life having meaning. What does this core values, how does this connect with young people struggling with life having meaning?
Well, I find for young people, many young people don't have two meaning-making opportunities that I had when I was their age. One is religion, because if 50% are not affiliated, then it's hard to think about a cosmic perspective, or not just your role in the world, but your place in the universe, ethical framework perhaps, or how do you live a mission or purpose-driven life. You don't need religion for any of that, but in the absence of religion, you have to be proactive in terms of how you're addressing those questions in your life. The second is the liberal arts. Gail and I are committed to liberal arts. I don't want to speak to her, but for me, it's because the liberal arts changed my life. But I don't see, when students come to USC, that much of a commitment to the liberal arts. Students are spending $75,000 a year to get a degree that'll allow them to pay down their debt when they graduate. That's why 40% of our students are finance majors. It's not that 40% of students dream of finance growing up. And so I think that's what's happened in the university. It's gone from transformational to transactional. You do this to get into the university. Then you get this job to get this to get your partner. You get a partner to get this, and you get to buy this, you get this, you get this, then you get your life. So you have to jump through all these hoops to get to your right life, as opposed to having a holistic perspective of your world and being the author of that life story. And so what I think for students is that they haven't had any real meaning-making conversations, even though they've had a lot of different kinds of conversations. They've talked a lot about the macro, but not so much the macro. They've talked about how to get into college, but not why am I going to college. They've learned to play the piano because it looks good on a resume, not because they love music. And so I think all these transactional interactions have even made human relationships transactional. I used to feel like a mentor. Now I feel like a service provider. I used to think of students as mentees. Now they're more like clients. Everything has become ROI, return on investment. I'd rather it was ROI, return on integrity, like Audrey's talking about. That to me is why we are in a university, or that's why we do religion. These are not-for-profit, mission-driven enterprises that in some ways aren't providing meaning for students when they need it most. What I'd like them to think about is meaning isn't something you find, meaning is something you make. And what are the skills for making meaning in your life? How do you live a life of meaning? You live a meaningful life. What does that mean? Well, that's where the fun comes in, and that's where the journey starts, and that's where the process begins. And so I think that students are desperate for meaning. They might not be getting it in ways that previous generations have. and they might not have the literacy to think about meaning making as opposed to meaning finding. And I think 18 to 26 is the right time in one's life to think about meaning making. And that's why I do the work that I do.
Gail, you're a Christian scholar, and with Jesus' statement that I come to bring life and to bring it more abundantly, that you might have life more abundantly. How do we have these young people create an abundant life as in a community?
You know, one of the ways I'm really trying to approach this is to listen to them first, to listen to young people. And they have some amazing things to teach me. For example, I learned within the last 5 years, as Varun has suggested, they've shifted. But one of the things I've learned is they have this really interesting way. They take care of one another. They know where each other is every second of the day. They can contact a friend and within seconds get a response in a way that we never could. So even though they have trouble sometimes having real conversations face to face, they keep track and they do have a sense of how to care for one another. So how do you do that, combining kind of the digital and the real, the virtual and the real? They're doing that in some ways. One of the other things that I learned from them is their concern about, as I mentioned, some of the issues of the day. And so it seems to me that one of the things we're missing is we're coming at talking about kind of values, of talking about fullness of life in a kind of old way. Like, this is how we used to do it. We used to go through the dogma and the doctrine, and we sort of lay it all out, and then we'd pick up the values and then we'd put them into our life. They are kind of living at such a fast pace that I think we need to stop and go, oh yeah, your context of your life is not just the church that has these values. Your context of your life is a society where there's systematic racism. We need to pay attention to that. We need to pay attention to the things that you are values that we don't have built into what we were teaching you before. And I think we need to pay attention to how you care for one another. That's not the same way that we've thought people should care for one another. We need to care for people who don't look like us. We need to care for those who are on the other side of the world. There's so many different ways that they are connected in positive ways with social media that I think we could actually begin to expand what is fullness of life, and how do we do this? And if we shifted what we're teaching, I think in the churches, for example, in religion, we could begin to have these deeper conversations. Their life is they are global citizens. They are not just citizens in a tiny community. So how do we help them feel like they are connected with people in this global community? I'm not sure we're doing a good job at that. And I think they're finding these sort of funny ways that are working for them a little bit, but not giving them the frame. We could help give the framework, I think, of, okay, then how do we really have compassion for one another? They have much to teach us if we listened.
Audrey, you talk about the sacredness of life. Explain that just a little bit of why that's important in the context of what we're talking about today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This aspect of really honoring what is sacred and respecting what is sacred is very, very important. So I feel that the sacredness of life allows us to know in the silence and solitude that one can hear that small voice within that we've been talking about, the silence, the stillness, and finding the ways to be in that space where we can really listen to that still small voice. And it's always guiding us and giving us inspiration, but we have to connect with it. So in this aspect of loneliness, it provides an opportunity for people to do just that, to have the time, because as Gail was mentioning, we are on a fast track. People nowadays are like have no time, but they're busy, but it is what they are busy about and what are they committing their busyness to, and how is all of that busyness and the commitment you're making to your life, is it making a difference? Is it having positive change? Are you yourself demonstrating this aspect of what the sacred represents? And I had the opportunity to meet an enlightened spiritual master who I call my beautiful spiritual mother. And she said, and in many sacred texts, this will say the same thing, that God is love. So in everyday, the seemingly ordinariness of everyday living is the opportunity to actualize the reality of the divine in our everyday lives through having loving thoughts, loving speech, and loving action. And if we can master where we are is the holy ground, if we can master that, it is an everyday way to honor the sacredness of life, because you yourself become that conduit of the expression of sacredness in your thoughts, in your speech, and in your actions. And I think all of the sacred texts are meant to help us to be able to make that connection. And like I said earlier, maybe through proscriptive behaviors, but actually the underlying message of that is the potential of all of us to be that expression of love in action. And I think, as Gail was mentioning in her examples, I think the young people today who are very interested in activism are finding this as a meaningful, purposeful way to be that expression of compassion, caring, and love for others, and setting forth that selfless service. You know, in Sanskrit, we call it seva. And I think seva, selfless service, is one of the fastest ways that one can come out of self-absorption and to really develop that heart of service. In the deepest meaning, it is really a devotional service to God. But it is also the expression of seeing the divine in all living things and to serve all living things, including the earth, and with great love and with great care and with great compassion. And that is the sacred ground of being and how we honor the sacredness of life.
Varun, when someone comes in to you and they're discouraged and they're trying to say life has no meaning for me, how do you help them get their arms around the sacredness of life, the importance of service, and how that will empower their life to create greater meaning?
We have a real privilege to walk alongside students as chaplains. And I think as chaplains, we can offer a perspective that maybe others can't. And what I realize is that it's just important sometimes to hold space. It's important to bear witness to the struggle that our students are going through. Our students don't feel seen and heard, and some of that's because of the social media noise and the other noise in the world. Some of that for my campus is because it's a big campus in a big city, and so there's a lot of people. But I think a chaplain can be there and honor someone's experience and ensure that they feel seen and heard. And so students don't often come to me saying things like, I have no meaning in my life, but they'll come talking about something smaller, like, I don't know what I want to do for a job, or I don't understand why this person doesn't like me, or my parents want me to do this, but I don't really want to do this. And that conversation will take us to a conversation about meaning. And like I said before, for many of these students, it could be the first time they're wrestling with an idea of meaning as an overarching theme for their life. And so just being there to think about this with them is a great sort of privilege. In terms of giving them advice, like Gail, like I learn a lot from them too. So I don't know if it's up to me to say, here's what meaning is. I can't say that for students. I wrestle with that myself. But what I do try to encourage them to think about is, how do you ask the right questions, and how do you think about meaning as a journey rather than trying to think about meaning as the answer. Our students are at schools like USC and Chapman because they've had the right answer to every question that's ever been asked, but no one's ever asked them what the questions are. What are the questions? Okay, you got all the right answers to the SAT, to the achievement test, the ACT, to your AP exams, whatever, but what are the right questions? The right questions in a spiritual context are the questions that make us human, the questions that connect us with everyone who's ever lived. Those are questions of meaning. Who am I? What does my life mean? How do I live my values? And so what I try to do is ask questions, and not try to ask questions so that students can answer questions, but just ask questions that students can carry with them. Because what I found is that the answers to the ultimate questions change. Who am I at 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 is different. It should be different. That's what evolution and growth looks like. But the question of who am I is not different. The question of who am I endures. And to the extent that students are looking for a sense of meaning that endures across their life, they can only do that through the questions, not through the answers. And so in some ways, the process of learning is also a process of unlearning. And our students have learned in a particular way that there has to be the right answer to get to the next step. No one's ever told them, well, what are the questions? And maybe there doesn't have to be the right answer to that question. Maybe the answer changes, but the question endures. And even saying that to a student can be revelatory on their meaning-making journey.
Gail, tell us some good news of what's going on. Tell us some good things that are going on so for those of us who want to be optimists, we have reason to be optimists of the young people today.
That's a lot to put on me, but I quoted Taylor and Dahlia, and I'm telling you, these students give me enormous hope. And to kind of go back a little bit to what you asked Varun, when students come to me, very similar, is I try to get them to answer questions, but to go into what do they already know? Like, how do they get, and I think, Audrey, you were getting to this, how do they get to their kind of deep spirit and the stillness within? What do they already really know? And the reality is that they know a huge amount. They already know where their heart is. They already know that, getting this job and making all this money is really not going to make them happy, and buying all those things. They know that. They all know those things. But it's just that they don't see any other way. And they've never been given permission to kind of go deep within themselves, and you mentioned me being I'm Christian myself. And if I have a Christian student come in, I ask them to talk about, it sounds like funny in a way, but like, what would Jesus do? How do you understand Jesus, who didn't care about all that stuff, but cared about serving people, cared about compassion? And how do you get in touch with that in yourself? That kind of deep spiritual root of the values of caring, not only for other people, but yourself, loving your neighbor as yourself. They haven't heard that. They think you're just supposed to be on this trajectory and getting all this stuff. So what I'm really excited about is when students begin that journey and they begin to actually trust themselves, to have some confidence to all the things that they really do know, but they've just been told not to pay attention to it, whether it's from social media or the university or whoever it is, they're not hearing it. So I'm seeing a lot of students that are learning to be still. They're learning to turn off their phones. They're learning that they're addicted, and they're finding ways to become, as we all are, to become unaddicted. I see students do things like they go out to dinner with one another and they all put their cell phones in the middle of the table. And the first person to pick one up pays the bill. So they are finding ways themselves so that they can get themselves away from that. They're beginning to understand they need to learn to just be still, to be with one another. And when I start to teach this and to talk with them, they start coming up with these incredible things they do. Just like, that's one example, but many, many, many ways that they can learn to really listen to what it is they know and to be in relationship with one another. They just need permission to do what they know is the right thing, which is really to be in relationship and to listen deep within to their spiritual resources. And I just don't think we're allowing necessarily enough spaces for that. But there is great hope. I see it all the time. I have heard some of the most creative ways they have found for example, to move themselves from social media, and that they will be the ones who help us to figure out how it is we're not going to be addicted to these devices. The last 10 years they exploded. Just like, I have this sense that it's going to be someday like smoking. We're going to find out that this is cancerous, right? And that everybody's going to have to find a way to become, to stop smoking. And we did that in this country, didn't we? We really did an amazing job. Their generation's going to do that with the digital addiction. They're going to use it in the appropriate ways. So I see them starting that already, and I'm really excited about that. And my deep hope, I think, which I think I share with all of you, is that they do find these kind of spiritual resources to draw upon and find within themselves the strength to be able to go against the crowd, to be able to do the things that they know they need to do.
Audrey, a very quick concluding thought.
Well, thank you for this honor of joining in on this panel and to really have this discussion on this very important issue. But you know, our youth, as with youth of each and every generation from the beginning of time, hold the keys to our future and the well-being of our planet and our civilization. It is in their hands because they're our progeny. And so we should be mindful of the kind of progeny that we are raising and the context within which they are being raised. And of course, the world today is far more challenging than in, prior years because there are far more people, and just necessarily the complexities of having more people, 7.5 billion people in the world, is going to increase complexities necessarily. But also the social media aspect that Varun brought up allows us not to take any rest of the press of the challenges that people all around the world are facing in real time. So that is actually giving us an opportunity to rise to the call of action. And I do believe that this future in finding deeper meaning and purpose in life is also based upon the ability to be able to express compassion and caring for those who are suffering in real time, no matter where in the world they may be, or even within our own families, our own communities, within our own country, and to be able to mobilize for the higher purpose, to be able to bring compassion, relief, and understanding, and to be in that place where we are in respectful togetherness with each other. And truly it is togetherness, through being together and in community, that we will be able to create these mobilizations, and no matter what the subject area may be that is posing the greatest challenges in life and real existential challenges, that these kinds of mobilizations can take place because of the power of civil society, which is every person and their capacity to be able to move from that place of love and compassion, that will be able to create a tipping point for transformation that will really make a huge difference. And I want to end my time here by a quote from Hermann Hesse, who was speaking about loneliness and isolation. And he said, "It is a way of bitter suffering, but then our solitude is overcome. We are no longer alone, for we find that our innermost self is the spirit that is God, the indivisible." And so therein speaks our unity in the one consciousness, which is inherent within each and every one of us, and the connectivity that we have with each other and all of life on earth.
Varun?
It's been such a extraordinary year in so many ways, Larry, since the last time we saw each other, since the last time all of us were together. It's almost like a apocalyptic year in many ways. We've had a global plague, we've had fires and floods, we've had political unrest. There were even locusts that descended upon India at one point. I don't think there's anything more biblical than locusts. And so I think for people who study religion and religious texts like us, this actually looks familiar, because all of our texts are filled with stories of floods and fires and locusts and plagues, and these cataclysmic events that force us to really re-examine who we are as a society, what matters to us, how do we act and move, and how do we treat each other. I think our students have gone through this in that way. 45% of students have looked for a new spiritual resource or mental health research during the pandemic. And my sense is that this very difficult time in the world has shown them that they need to be together. They really, really miss each other. They are now seeing the limits of their disconnected sort of social media lives. They won't take each other's company for granted anymore. We are USC, we have a huge demand for residential life, huge demand. We have the highest conversion rate in our history. It's because people want to be together when we come back into the fall. And so my hope is that this is an opportunity for young people, this terrible, tragic, brutal year, is an opportunity for young people to see how they are connected to everyone else, that they are saving lives of people that they don't know by the way they act in the move in the world, to see that they're a part of a larger whole, to see that ethics matter, to see there's a limit to screen addiction, to see that we can't continually abuse animals without consequence. And I have seen that. I see a lot of hope, optimism, and love from our students who are excited to be back with each other. And even though I think the fall will be really difficult, I know it's going to be joyful, beautiful, triumphant as well. So I do think that in an age where young people aren't raised with religion, the world gave them a religious event. And religious or not, you can't come out of this year with this and thinking the same way that we thought last year.
Gail?
Well, thank you for that. And I just want to build upon what you both said, and that is that this year has been so amazing, and I think there is so much we can learn from it. I spoke with Hashem Alaskari, who's a world-renowned scientist, at the beginning of the pandemic, and it was when he was monitoring across the world emissions, coming from different countries, and could actually tell which country would next have a soar in the pandemic by their emissions. And so the scientists have learned so much, and they have learned that actually we can slow global warming, for example. So I think that one of the things that we're learning from this last year is that things are possible we didn't know were possible. And so all of the racial unrest has taught us a lot in this country, particularly. I think that there is so much to learn in the sense that we need to model how it is that we are going to come out of this and actually be realistic and tackle these things that the students were looking at, saying, I don't have a future. I don't have an earth in the future. People don't get along. People are divided. And I think we can come out of this and learn a lot from it. And we can begin to model, what does it mean to slow down a little? What does it mean to have productivity not our most important thing in life? I think, as Audrey was saying, we can begin to model, what does it mean to actually sit and have dinner with one another and not be looking at our cell phones? What does it mean for us to find stillness within ourselves and to do all that we do out of our sense of stillness and our own faith? And as we are learning that and listening to the young people, we're going to be learning it together. And they're going to be then creating a whole new world out of these lessons. I really believe what Varun said, that we are about to have a renaissance, and that we need to be the ones that begin to model the most important questions that need to be asked, and the way to be in the world, to be with stillness, to be with meaning, with ethics, with living our lives in a way that is grounded and centered and connected with community, and really is in a sense one with, as Audrey mentioned, a kind of consciousness that surrounds us all. We can do that as we come out of this, and as we do that, we are going to help the young people, because they're ahead of us. They're ready for it. They want meaning, they want connection, they want purpose. So I hope we all learn that. I hope that we all learn that. We all model it together.
Well, I'd like to thank the three of you for giving me another lesson. I hope you don't make sure that I have to now write a report on this and get graded on it, because each one has taught me something special. Over the past 3 or 4 years, as we've worked together, what has struck me most is that the need that we have to help our young people understand that they need to move from tolerance, which to me, tolerance means you keep your same prejudices, but you smile a lot. We need to move from there to understanding, but we need to move from there to appreciation. And I think our young people are beginning, because they can see an entire world which we never were able to see before. Mm-hmm. They're beginning to learn how to appreciate differences, commonalities, envy of what others do, which is right, questioning of what they're doing that they believe needs to be discarded, and building on this. And I'm very hopeful for the future. But like you, Gail, I think it's a process of discarding some things along the way when they finally realize that those things aren't bringing to them the meaning which they have. So thank you all very much. I appreciate it. And I would just close with this, and that is, many years ago, there was a prophet in our church who said, no success in life can compensate for failure in the home. And I think our young people, in looking at the homes that they are going to create, they're going to look at home as not just what goes on inside a house or an apartment, but what goes on in their neighborhood, what goes on in their community, what goes on in their nation, and recognize that all of that has to work together. So thank you very much, and really appreciate it. Wonderful hour.